My name is Saffron Graves, and 3 months ago, I stuck my bare hand into a 500-degree oven and felt absolutely nothing. Not heat, not pain, nothing. You see, I'm cursed, doomed to never feel warmth again. And the man standing across from me, he's Asher Voss, a fire demon who can't touch anything without turning it to ash. We're about to compete on the most dangerous cooking show in the supernatural world, and honestly, one of us might not survive this. But before I tell you how we nearly burned down a television studio and maybe fell in love in the process, smash that like button if you enjoy supernatural romance stories, hit subscribe for more magical tales, and drop a comment telling me, have you ever felt cursed by something you couldn't control? Because trust me, this story is about to get very, very hot. Let me start from the beginning, because every curse has an origin story, and mine began with a food critic who couldn't handle the truth. It was 6 months ago. I was 26, finally making a name for myself in London's brutal culinary scene. My little patisserie, Sweet Saffron, had just gotten its first Michelin star, and I thought I was on top of the world. I specialized in what I called emotional pastries, desserts that somehow captured feelings. My chocolate soufflé could make grown men cry with nostalgia. My lavender macarons eased heartbreak better than any therapy session. Then he walked in. Malachi Thornwick, food critic for the Supernatural Culinary Review. I should have known something was off when he ordered my comfort creme brulee, and his eyes glowed purple when he tasted it. But I was young, ambitious, and frankly, a little cocky. Not impressed, he'd said, pushing the barely touched dessert away. 0 stars. Now, a bad review hurts any chef, but when you've poured your literal heart into creating something, when you've stayed up for 72 hours perfecting a recipe, when you've invested your life savings into your dream, well, you don't always respond gracefully. Maybe the problem isn't my cooking, I'd snapped back. Maybe it's your inability to appreciate genuine artistry when you taste it. His smile was slow and dangerous. Genuine artistry? Child, you have no idea what genuine suffering tastes like. Let me educate you. I should have apologized, should have backed down, should have recognized the warlock sitting in my cafe for what he was. Instead, I doubled down. The only thing suffering here is your palate and, apparently, your writing career if you're reduced to bullying small business owners for content. That's when he stood up, his eyes now fully purple, power crackling around his fingertips like dark lightning. You want to talk about suffering? You think you understand comfort food? Let's see how comfortable you are when you can never feel comfort again. The hex hit me like ice water in my veins. Not cold, because I'd never feel cold again, but wrong. Fundamentally, terrifyingly wrong. Cursed to feel no temperature, he had pronounced, his voice echoing with supernatural authority. Ice or fire, frost or flame, all the same to you now. Let's see how your emotional pastries fare when you can't even tell if your oven is on. He'd left then, dropping a 20 on the table like this was all just another dinner review. You have to understand, for a pastry chef, temperature isn't just important, it's everything. The difference between a perfect creme brulee and a disaster is 5 degrees. Between a flaky croissant and a soggy mess, temperature control. Between a soufflé that rises like a prayer and one that falls flat, temperature. Timing, the delicate dance between heat and ingredient that separates magic from mediocrity. And suddenly, I couldn't feel any of it. The first week after the curse was hell, and I use that word knowing exactly what hell looks like now. Spoiler alert for later in our story. I burned everything, not because I was careless, but because I couldn't tell when things were hot. I'd grab sheet pans barehanded and wonder why my assistants were screaming. I'd stick my finger into molten caramel to test consistency and only realize something was wrong when I saw the look of horror on my sous chef's face. But humans are adaptable creatures, and witches even more so. Slowly, painfully, I learned to bake without one of my most crucial senses. I memorized the exact color of properly caramelized sugar, not the warm amber I could no longer feel forming, but the visual cue of gold shifting to bronze. I learned to judge doneness by the way steam rose from pastries, by the precise moment when cake batter changed texture, by sounds I'd never noticed before, the subtle shift in bubbling that meant my jam had reached setting point. My other senses sharpened to compensate. I could smell the exact second when chocolate began to scorch, could hear the whisper soft crack that meant my sugar work was cooling too fast, could feel the vibrations through my mixing bowl that told me my meringue had reached perfect peaks. In a weird way, it made me a better baker. I had to understand my craft on a molecular level now, had to truly know my ingredients instead of relying on the shortcuts that temperature sense provided. But it also made baking lonely. You see, comfort food isn't just about taste. It's about warmth. The heat that spreads through your chest when you sip hot cocoa on a winter day, the way fresh bread warms your hands when you break it open, the cozy feeling of a kitchen filled with the gentle heat of a working oven. I could create all of these experiences for others, but I could never feel them myself. I could bake the perfect soup that would warm someone to their bones, but to me, it might as well have been cold gazpacho. I could make hot chocolate so rich and comforting it would make people weep with happiness, but when I tasted it, it was just liquid. Sweet liquid with no more warmth than melted ice cream. Food became mechanical, precise, maybe perfect, but empty of joy. My customers still came, still raved about my pastries, but I could see it in their eyes. Something was missing. The soul that Malachi had accused me of lacking. Maybe he'd been right. Maybe he'd taken it from me, along with my ability to feel warmth. That's when I saw the advertisement. Cauldron Bake-Off Supernatural Edition, calling all witches, wizards, demons, and fae with culinary aspirations. Winner receives £250,000 and one wish granted by our resident archmage. One wish granted. I stared at that advertisement for 3 hours. My cold coffee staying exactly the same temperature because temperature was meaningless to me now. But one wish could fix everything. The application process was brutal. Video submissions, skill assessments, background checks that went back 3 generations to make sure you weren't secretly a chaos demon trying to poison the viewing public. But I made it. 6 months after being cursed, I got the call. Congratulations, Miss Graves. Welcome to Cauldron Bake-Off. Filming begins in 2 weeks. Pack light, but bring your own knives. And Miss Graves, we hope you're ready for some heat. If only they knew. Share this video with friends who love slow burn romance because this is where things get interesting. The Cauldron Bake-Off studio was everything I'd expected and nothing I was prepared for. Imagine the most high-tech cooking show you've ever seen. Then add floating ingredient dispensers, self-stirring cauldrons, and ovens that responded to magical commands. The whole place hummed with barely contained supernatural energy. 20 contestants from across the magical spectrum stood in the main hall, sizing each other up. I spotted a sea witch who smelled perpetually of brine and seaweed, a vampire who'd apparently specialized in midnight snacks. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Twin Jinn sisters whose entire being seemed to shimmer with heat mirages, and a nervously chattering brown house elf who kept muttering about proper seasoning. And then there was him. Asher Voss stood apart from the group, quite literally. Everyone maintained at least a 6-foot radius around him, and I could see why. Even from across the room, I could see the heat shimmer rising off his skin like he was asphalt in summer. He wore heavy-duty, industrial-grade asbestos gloves that went up to his elbows, and his jaw was set in a permanent scowl that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. He was also, annoyingly, absolutely gorgeous. Tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair that looked like he'd run his hands through it repeatedly, golden eyes that literally glowed with inner fire, and the kind of sharp cheekbones that suggested some very attractive ancestors in his demonic lineage. He wore all black, probably because any other color would show scorch marks, and moved with the careful precision of someone who'd learned that every gesture could be destructive. Contestants. The voice of our host, Celeste Nightshade, rang out across the hall. She was a glamour witch whose appearance shifted subtly with each word she spoke, keeping everyone slightly off balance. Welcome to Cauldron Makeoff, where supernatural meets culinary, and sparks will definitely fly. Some of you more literally than others. Her eyes lingered on Asher, who somehow managed to look even more uncomfortable. Before we begin, she continued, we have a very special treat. This season, you'll be working in pairs. Nothing builds better television than a little chemistry. My stomach dropped. Working alone was hard enough with my curse. How was I supposed to coordinate with someone else when I couldn't even tell if my own equipment was functioning properly? Pairing assignments are based on our expert analysis of your applications, designed to create the most interesting dynamics possible. When I call your names, find your partner and your assigned station. She began reading names. The vampire got paired with a werewolf, which seemed unnecessarily dramatic. The Jinn twins were split up and matched with what appeared to be two very nervous hedge witches. A phoenix-born was matched with an ice elementalist because apparently the producers had a thing for opposites. Saffron Graves? Celeste's voice cut through my growing anxiety. You're partnered with Asher Voss. Of course I was. I looked across the room to find Asher already looking at me, his golden eyes unreadable. He didn't look pleased, but then again, he didn't look like he'd been pleased about anything since birth. I walked over to him, dodging the camera crew that was already circling like vultures sensing drama. Hi, I said, offering what I hoped was a confident smile. I'm Saffron. Looks like we're... I know who you are. His voice was rough, like smoke and gravel, with just a hint of an accent I couldn't place. Scottish, maybe? And I know this is a mistake. Excuse me? He held up his gloved hands. See these? They're not a fashion statement. Everything I touch burns. Metal melts. Food scorches. People... He trailed off, his expression darkening. Let's just say partnership isn't really my strong suit. Well, lucky for you, I said, extending my hand for a handshake. I can't feel heat, so we should get along perfectly. He stared at my outstretched hand like it was a loaded weapon. You can't feel heat? Cursed, I said simply. 6 months ago. Can't feel temperature at all. Hot, cold, anything in between. Which, for a pastry chef, is about as useful as you'd expect. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite sympathy, but understanding, maybe. Trust me, he said, not taking my hand. You don't want the smoke. And trust me, I replied, not backing down, I've handled colder shoulders. His eyes flashed, literally flashed with golden fire. Keep talking, Frost Witch. My temper runs at about 2,000 degrees Celsius. Good thing I can't feel heat then. We stood there for a moment, sizing each other up while cameras captured every second of tension. Finally, Celeste's voice boomed across the studio again. Pairs, find your stations. Your first challenge begins in 15 minutes, and it's going to be a hot one. Asher let out what might have been a laugh or might have been a growl. This should be interesting. Our station was a study in contradictions. On one side, a state-of-the-art convection oven with digital temperature controls that I couldn't trust because I couldn't verify them. On the other side, what appeared to be a specialized fireproof work surface made of some kind of dark stone that absorbed heat instead of conducting it. Your first challenge, Celeste announced once we were all at our stations, is a classic with a supernatural twist. We want you to make molten chocolate lava cake. But here's the catch. Your cake must be baked using only supernatural abilities. No conventional ovens, no electric mixers, no temperature gauges. You have 90 minutes, and your time starts now. The studio erupted into chaos. The Phoenix-born immediately burst into flames and began using herself as a human oven. The Jinn were creating whirlwinds to mix their batter at impossible speeds. The vampire and werewolf were already arguing about whose supernatural abilities were more suitable for baking. I looked at Asher, who was staring at the ingredients like they'd personally offended him. Right, I said, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. Molten lava cake. I can make that blindfolded. The trick is getting the timing perfect so the center stays liquid while the exterior sets. Usually requires precise temperature control, which I gestured vaguely at myself, not my strong suit anymore. And I can't touch anything because I destroy it. This is going to be a disaster. Not if we work together. I was already reaching for the chocolate, my mind racing through possibilities. Look, I can judge doneness by visual cues, by timing, by the way the batter moves. But I need heat, and I need it controlled. Can you do controlled? He looked at me like I'd asked him to juggle flaming chainsaws. Define controlled? Well, lava cakes need about 425 degrees Fahrenheit. Too hot and the outside burns before the inside warms. Too cool and the whole thing stays liquid. I don't do Fahrenheit, he said grimly. I do off and everything's on fire. Okay, work with me here. I started breaking chocolate into chunks, falling into the rhythm of familiar work. What's the coolest flame you can manage? Coolest? He actually looked offended. I'm a fire demon, not a birthday candle. Asher. I stopped what I was doing and looked directly at him. We can either figure this out together, or we can both go home in the first challenge. And I don't know about you, but I really need that wish. Something in my voice must have gotten through to him. His expression softened slightly, and for a moment, he looked less like an intimidating supernatural creature and more like a tired man carrying a burden too heavy for his shoulders. Fine, he said quietly. But if I burn down the studio, it's your fault. The next hour was unlike anything I'd ever experienced in a kitchen. Asher removed his gloves, and I immediately understood why everyone kept their distance. The air around his hands shimmered with heat so intense I could see it distorting the space around him. When he held his palm 6 inches above our mixing bowl, the chocolate began to melt immediately. Too hot, I said, watching the chocolate seize. Can you pull back? I'm trying, he gritted out through clenched teeth. This isn't exactly an exact science. Okay, different approach. I grabbed a new bowl of chocolate. Don't think about making it cooler. Think about further away, like turning down the volume instead of changing the station. He moved his hand further from the bowl, and this time the chocolate melted slowly, smoothly, into glossy perfection. Better, I breathed, already whisking in butter. Now I need you to maintain that exact distance while I add the eggs. You're joking. Do I look like I'm joking? For the next 40 minutes, we developed the most unusual baking rhythm I'd ever experienced. Asher became my living oven, hovering his hands at precise distances to provide different levels of heat. I became his eyes and instincts, judging temperatures by color, texture, and timing instead of actual sensation. "Batter's ready," I announced, pouring the mixture into individual ramekins. "Now we need to bake them. About 12 minutes at 425. "How am I supposed to maintain 425 degrees for 12 minutes? Asher demanded. "The same way I'm supposed to judge doneness without being able to feel if they're actually hot," I shot back. "We improvise." What followed was probably the most intense 12 minutes of my life. Asher positioned his hands above the ramekins while I watched for visual cues, the way the edges began to set, the subtle change in the surface texture, the barely perceptible shift in color that indicated the outsides were cooking while the centers remained liquid. "How much longer?" Asher's voice was strained. I could see sweat beading on his forehead from the effort of controlling his fire. 2 more minutes, I said, not taking my eyes off the cakes. "You're doing great." "I'm about to lose control," he warned. "No, you're not." I surprised myself with the confidence in my voice. "You've got this. I can see it working. The edges are perfect. The centers are staying liquid. Just hold it steady." "Saffron." "Trust me," I said, just like I'm trusting you. At exactly 12 minutes, I made the call. "Now, pull back." Asher jerked his hands away, and I immediately inverted the ramekins onto plates, saying a silent prayer to whatever baking gods might be listening. The cakes held their shape for a heart-stopping moment, then released from the ramekins with perfect glossy tops. "Holy shit," Asher breathed. "Language," I said, automatically, then grinned. "But yeah, holy shit." "Time," Celeste called. We stepped back from our station, both breathing hard, both staring at our creation like we couldn't quite believe what we'd just accomplished. "Not bad for a disaster," Asher said quietly. "Not bad at all," I agreed. When the judges tasted our cake, molten center, perfect texture, rich chocolate flavor with just a hint of the supernatural fire that had created it, they awarded us 8.5 out of 10. "Remarkable technique," the head judge announced. "Unconventional, but undeniably effective. This is what collaboration looks like." As we walked back to our station, Asher looked at me with something that might have been the beginning of respect. "Maybe this partnership won't be a complete disaster after all," he said. I smiled. "Don't get ahead of yourself. We've still got 11 more challenges to survive." But for the first time since being cursed, I felt something that might have been hope warming in my chest. Not literally warming, of course, but close enough. Living in the Cauldron Bake-Off house was like being trapped in a supernatural reality show, which technically it was. 20 contestants, shared living spaces, cameras everywhere, and enough magical energy to power a small city. The producers had thoughtfully separated rooms by elemental compatibility, fire creatures on one side, water elementals on the other, with us poor humans and non-elementals scattered throughout as buffers. I'd been assigned a room with the vampire, who was actually quite lovely once you got past the whole drinking blood thing, and one of the Jinn twins. Asher, unsurprisingly, had been given a single room at the end of the fire creature hallway, probably for everyone else's safety. 3 days into filming, I was discovering that my curse had an unexpected side effect: insomnia. When you can't feel the comfort of warm blankets or the chill of cool air, sleep becomes elusive. I'd been lying in bed for 2 hours, listening to my vampire roommate's unnecessarily dramatic sighs. Apparently, even the undead have trouble sleeping sometimes, when I decided to give up and go practice in the kitchen. The house had a fully equipped practice kitchen that contestants could use during designated off hours, and midnight definitely qualified as off hours. I slipped out of my room, barefoot and wearing pajama pants and an oversized sweater, planning to work on my croissant technique for tomorrow's breakfast challenge. I wasn't expecting to find Asher already there. He was standing at the far end of the kitchen, staring into one of the walk-in refrigerators with the door open. No gloves this time, his hands were bare, and I could see the gentle shimmer of heat rising from his skin even in the dim emergency lighting. "Can't sleep either?" I asked softly, not wanting to startle him. He turned, and in the low light, his eyes glowed like embers. "Temperature regulation issues," he said simply. "I run too hot for most beds." The mattress started smoldering. "Ah." I moved closer, noting how he instinctively stepped back to maintain distance. "Mind if I work? I promise not to get in your way." "It's your kitchen too," he said, but he was watching me carefully, like he was worried about something. I gathered ingredients for croissanto, falling into the meditative rhythm of measuring and mixing. Asher remained by the walk-in, and after a few minutes, I realized why. "You're using it as an air conditioner," I said, not looking up from my work. "What?" "The refrigerator. You're standing in the cold air because it's the only way to get your body temperature down enough to be comfortable." He was quiet for a long moment. "Yeah," he finally admitted. "Pathetic, isn't it?" "Not pathetic," I said, beginning to knead my dough. "Practical. I do something similar, actually." "You do?" "I sit in hot baths that I can't feel because the routine of it helps me remember what comfort used to be like. Muscle memory, I suppose." I glanced up at him. We're both trying to find ways to feel normal, even when normal isn't really an option anymore. Something shifted in his expression. "How long have you been cursed?" 6 months. You?" "I'm not cursed. I'm just me. Born this way. Fire demon heritage tends to manifest early and intensely." I stopped kneading. "Born this way? You mean you've never been able to touch someone without burning them?" "No." His voice was matter-of-fact, but I could hear the pain underneath. "Last time I tried skin-to-skin contact, I was 12. Put my hand on my little sister's arm to comfort her during a thunderstorm. She had third-degree burns." My heart clenched. "Asher." "She was fine," he said quickly. "Healed completely. But I learned my lesson. Gloves, distance, and never, ever let anyone get too close." I looked down at my hands, still covered in flour from the dough. "What would happen if I touched you right now?" "You'd burn," he said automatically. "Cursed or not, fire is fire, and my skin runs at about 120 degrees Fahrenheit on a good day." "But I can't feel heat," I pointed out. "That doesn't mean it won't damage you. Pain is your body's warning system. Just because you can't feel the alarm doesn't mean the fire isn't real." I considered this, still kneading my dough. What if we tested it? "What?" He moved away from the refrigerator, alarm clear in his voice. "Saffron, no, absolutely not." "Just a quick touch," I said, wiping my hands clean on a towel. "One finger. If I start to burn, I'll pull back immediately." "You won't be able to tell if you're burning. That's the whole problem." "You'll be able to tell," I said. "You'll know if I'm getting damaged before I do." He stared at me like I'd suggested we juggle live grenades. "This is insane." "Maybe," I admitted, "but when's the last time you touched another person, Asher? Really touched them?" The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. I could see the war playing out across his features, longing battling with self-preservation, hope fighting against years of learned caution. 16 years, he said finally, so quietly I almost didn't hear him. 16 years since I've touched another person's skin. My heart broke for him. That's too long. It's necessary. It's heartbreaking. I took a step toward him, and he immediately took a step back. Saffron, don't. I can't control my temperature when I'm emotional, and right now, I could see it. The way the air around him shimmered more intensely, the way his eyes glowed brighter. He was heating up just from the possibility of human contact. Then let me control it, I said. Let me decide if it's worth the risk. It's not your risk to take. If I hurt you, then at least we'll both know. But Asher, what if you don't? I held up my hand, palm facing him, still several feet away. One touch, 1 second. If anything goes wrong, I promise I'll never ask again. He stared at my hand like it was both salvation and damnation. This is the stupidest thing I've ever agreed to, he muttered, but he held up his own hand, matching my gesture. We moved toward each other slowly, like we were approaching a dangerous animal. When we were close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his skin, or rather, when I could see the visual distortion that indicated heat, since I couldn't actually feel it, we stopped. Last chance to back out. Never, I replied. I pressed my palm to his. For a moment, we both held our breath, waiting for pain, for damage, for the inevitable disaster. Instead, well, not nothing. I could see steam rising gently from where our skin touched, could see the way his eyes widened in shock, could feel the texture of his palm against mine, calloused from years of kitchen work, warm in a way I couldn't sense, but somehow knew was there. How? He whispered. I looked down at our joined hands, marveling at the sight. Maybe my curse and your fire cancel each other out somehow? Like magical temperature equilibrium? I don't understand, he said, but he didn't pull his hand away. This should be impossible. A lot of impossible things have been happening lately, I pointed out. Maybe we should just accept this one as a good impossible. We stood there in the dim kitchen, hands pressed together, both of us staring like we couldn't quite believe what we were seeing. You're the only thing I can't destroy, he said finally, his voice rough with wonder. And you're the only warmth I can almost feel, I replied. That's when we heard footsteps in the hallway. We sprang apart like we'd been electrocuted, both of us suddenly aware of how this would look to the cameras, to the other contestants, to the producers who were looking for any excuse to create drama. If they catch us fraternizing, I started, immediate disqualification, both of us. The footsteps passed without stopping, but the moment was broken. We moved to opposite sides of the kitchen, the careful distance restored, the magical connection severed. But I could still see the wonder in his eyes, and I knew he could see the same in mine. This doesn't change anything, he said quietly. We're still competitors. We still have to win. I know, I said. And we can't let anyone know about this. I know. Good. He pulled his gloves back on with sharp, efficient movements. I should go. Early morning tomorrow. Asher? He paused at the kitchen entrance. Thank you for trusting me. He looked back at me, and for just a moment, his carefully controlled expression softened. Thank you, he said, for reminding me what touch feels like. Then he was gone, leaving me alone in the kitchen with my half-finished croissant dough and the lingering memory of warmth I couldn't feel, but somehow knew had been there. I finished my dough prep in a daze, my mind replaying those few seconds of contact over and over. For the first time in 6 months, I had touched someone and felt not heat exactly, but something. Connection, hope, the possibility that my curse wasn't a life sentence after all. When I finally returned to my room, I found I could sleep after all. If you're enjoying this slow burn romance, make sure to like this video and share it with someone who loves enemies to lovers stories. Week 2 of Cauldron Bake Off brought new challenges and, unfortunately, new enemies. Marina Tidecaller was a siren whose specialty was seafood-based desserts, and she had made it very clear from day one that she considered Asher and me to be her primary competition. She was technically skilled, devastatingly beautiful in that otherworldly way sirens manage effortlessly, and absolutely ruthless when it came to winning. She was also the type of person who viewed any alliance between competitors as a personal threat. "They're too comfortable together," I overheard her telling the Jin twins during breakfast on day 8. "Mark my words, those two are going to be trouble if someone doesn't break them up soon." I was sitting at the next table with my vampire roommate, Vera, who had excellent supernatural hearing and was filling me in on the conversation through subtle head tilts and eyebrow raises. "She's planning something," she whispered, leaning over her plate of what looked like blood oranges, but probably wasn't. "Sirens are natural manipulators, and this one has sabotage written all over her perfectly sculpted face." I glanced across the dining hall to where Asher sat alone, methodically eating scrambled eggs while maintaining his usual 6-foot radius of personal space. We'd been careful since our midnight encounter 3 days ago, polite during filming, professional during challenges, and absolutely no lingering touches or meaningful looks that the cameras might catch. But Marina was right about one thing. We had found a rhythm. Our teamwork during challenges was becoming smoother, more intuitive. We communicated with glances and subtle gestures, had developed a shorthand for discussing temperature and timing that worked around both of our limitations. We were dangerous competitors, and everyone knew it. Today's challenge, Celeste announced as we filed into the kitchen studio, is all about precision and presentation. You'll be making choux pastry, but not just any choux pastry. We want to see cream puffs, eclairs, profiteroles, croquembouche, anything your supernatural hearts desire as long as it's technically perfect and visually stunning. Choux pastry. My heart should have lifted. This was one of my specialties, a technical skill that I'd mastered long before my curse. The perfect choux required precise temperature control for the initial cooking of the paste, exact timing for adding eggs, and careful heat management during baking to achieve the proper rise and texture. In other words, it was the perfect challenge for a fire demon and a temperature-blind witch who had learned to work in perfect synchronization. "You have 3 hours, Celeste continued as we filed into the studio kitchen. "And remember, this is still a partnership competition. Both of your technical skills will be judged equally." Asher and I exchanged a look across the kitchen. We'd been hoping for a challenge like this, something that would play to both of our strengths and showcase the unusual techniques we'd developed together. What we weren't expecting was sabotage. The first sign of trouble came an hour into the challenge. I was preparing my mise en place, carefully measuring flour and checking that our butter was at the right consistency for the initial paste, when I noticed something wrong with my sugar. "Asher," I called quietly, not wanting to alert the cameras, "can you come here for a second?" He approached our station, gloves on, maintaining his usual careful distance from anything flammable. "What's wrong?" I held up a spoonful of what should have been pristine white sugar. Instead, it was slightly off color, with a graininess that looked wrong. I touched it to my tongue and immediately wished I could feel the burning sensation I knew should be there. "Salt," I said grimly. "Someone swapped our sugar for salt." Asher's eyes flashed gold with anger. All of it? I checked the container. 3 pounds of sugar, completely replaced. In a shoe challenge where sugar was essential for both the pastry and the filling, this was sabotage designed to eliminate us entirely. "Marina," Asher said grimly, his temperature visibly rising as the air around him began to shimmer more intensely. "We can't prove it," I said quickly, grabbing a fresh container of sugar from the communal pantry. "And we can't afford to lose time being angry. How much time do we have left?" 2 hours, 15 minutes, he said, checking the studio clock. "Then we start over. New sugar, fresh ingredients, and we work twice as fast." But our problems were just beginning. As I started heating water and butter for the shoe paste, I noticed an unusual smell. Acrid, chemical, wrong. I looked down at our cooktop and realized that someone had sabotaged more than just our sugar. "Asher, there's something on our burner," I said, pointing to an oily residue that was now smoking as it heated. "I think someone put cooking oil on the heating element." The oil caught fire just as the words left my mouth. In a normal kitchen, this would have meant calling for help, evacuating the station, and probably ending our challenge right there. But we weren't in a normal kitchen, and Asher wasn't a normal partner. "Everyone back," Celeste's voice rang out as smoke detectors began wailing. "Fire emergency protocol." The sprinkler system activated, sending cold water cascading down over the entire studio. Other contestants shrieked and scrambled to protect their work. Marina looked appropriately shocked and concerned, but I caught the satisfied glint in her eyes. That's when something extraordinary happened. Instead of panicking, instead of running, I grabbed Asher's gloved hands and pulled them toward the flames. "What are you doing?" he shouted over the alarm. "Trust me," I shouted back. I'd had an idea during our midnight conversation, something about the way our curses seemed to interact, the way my inability to feel heat might actually complement his inability to control it. Can you absorb fire? Not just create it, actually pull it back into yourself. Maybe I've never tried. Try now. He yanked off his gloves and held his bare hands over the burning cooktop. For a moment, nothing happened except that the fire seemed to burn brighter, fed by his natural heat. Then I placed my hands over his, skin to skin, just like we'd done in the kitchen 3 nights ago. The effect was immediate and startling. The fire didn't just go out, it flowed backward, drawn into Asher's hands like a movie played in reverse. The flames spiraled inward, the heat concentrated and contained until the oil fire simply disappeared. The sprinklers shut off. The alarms stopped. The studio fell silent, except for the sound of water dripping from overhead fixtures. Everyone was staring at us. "How did you do that?" one of the judges asked, stepping closer to examine our station. I looked at Asher, who looked equally stunned by what had just happened. We're not entirely sure, I admitted. It was instinct. "Remarkable," the head judge murmured. "I've never seen fire manipulation like that. The control required to reverse combustion?" He trailed off, making notes on his clipboard. Celeste appeared at our station, her glamour flickering with excitement. "Well, that was certainly dramatic. Are you both unharmed?" We nodded, still standing close together, still processing what we'd just accomplished. "Excellent! Then let's continue with the challenge, shall we? You've lost some time, but I think you've more than made up for it in entertainment value." As the other contestants returned to their stations and filming resumed, I caught Marina's expression from across the kitchen. She no longer looked satisfied. She looked worried. 2 hours left, I said quietly to Asher. "Think we can still pull this off?" He was looking at his hands like he'd never seen them before. "After what just happened, I think we can pull off anything." The next 2 hours were a masterclass in controlled chaos. We worked at double speed, communicating in our developed shorthand, our movements synchronized like we'd been partners for years instead of days. Asher provided precise, controlled heat for cooking the choux paste, while I monitored texture and consistency. When it came time to pipe the pastry, I guided his hands to maintain exact temperatures, while he provided the steady heat needed for proper rising. But our real breakthrough came during the final baking phase. "I want to try something," I said as we loaded our cream puffs into the oven. "That fire absorption thing you did, what if you could do it in reverse? Not just create heat, but direct it exactly where it needs to go." "Like what?" "Like creating different temperature zones within the oven. Hotter at the bottom for initial rise, cooler at the top to prevent burning, medium heat in the middle for even browning." He was quiet for a long moment, considering. "It would require incredible precision. I'd have to maintain 3 different temperature zones simultaneously while you monitored multiple visual cues. So, basically Tuesday for us at this point," I said with a grin. Despite everything, he almost smiled. "You're insane." "Completely. Are you in?" He removed his gloves and positioned his hands around the oven, not touching the metal but close enough that his supernatural heat could influence the internal temperature. "Tell me what you see," he said. For the next 30 minutes, I provided a running commentary on the state of our pastries while Asher performed what could only be described as thermal magic. Bottoms browning too fast? He redirected heat upward. Tops getting pale? More heat to the upper zone. Centers not rising properly? A burst of steam generating warmth at exactly the right moment. It was the most intense, concentrated teamwork I'd ever experienced. By the time our timer went off, we were both exhausted, both exhilarated, and both covered in a fine sheen of sweat. His from the effort of controlling his fire, mine from the stress of coordinating something that should have been impossible. But when we opened the oven door, our cream puffs were perfect. Golden brown, evenly risen, with crispy exteriors that promised light, airy interiors. We'd created a batch of choux pastry that looked like it had come from a professional bakery, despite starting over halfway through the challenge and dealing with active sabotage. "Time!" Celeste called. We stepped back from our station, both breathing hard, both staring at our creation in amazement. "Not bad for a disaster," Asher said, echoing his words from our first challenge. "Not bad at all," I agreed. When the judges tasted our cream puffs, perfect texture, ideal flavor, technical excellence despite the dramatic circumstances, they awarded us 9.5 out of 10. "This is partnership cooking at its finest," the head judge announced. "You've taken 2 significant disadvantages and turned them into a competitive advantage. Your technique is unconventional, but the results speak for themselves." As the camera stopped rolling and contestants began cleaning their stations, Marina approached us with what I'm sure she thought was a conciliatory smile. "Congratulations on your recovery. It's amazing how you managed to overcome those unfortunate accidents." "Accidents?" Asher repeated flatly, his eyes glowing with barely contained fire. "Oh yes, kitchen mishaps happen to the best of us. Though I must say, your fire trick was quite impressive. I had no idea demons could absorb flames like that." "There's a lot you don't know about demons," Asher said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. Marina's smile faltered slightly. "Well, I suppose we're all learning new things about each other. May the best team win." She glided away, but I caught the calculating look she threw back at us over her shoulder. "She's not done," I said quietly to Asher. "Neither are we." And for the first time since I'd met him, his smile was genuinely predatory. As we packed up our station, I couldn't help but think about what had happened today. Not just the sabotage, not just our victory,
but the moment when we'd worked together to control his fire in ways neither of us had thought possible. We were becoming something more than partners, more than allies. We were becoming a team in the truest sense. Two broken people who'd somehow fit together perfectly, whose individual weaknesses became collective strength. And if Marina Tidecaller thought she could break that bond with a little kitchen sabotage, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. Comment below what's your favorite type of macaron. This chapter gets intense. Semifinals week arrived with all the drama and pressure you'd expect from a supernatural cooking competition, plus a few extra twists, courtesy of our increasingly desperate fellow competitors. We were down to 6 teams now, and the tension in the house was thick enough to cut with a knife. The Phoenix-born and Ice Elementalist had been eliminated after their fundamental incompatibility finally caused their souffle to both freeze and burst into flames simultaneously. The Vampire and Werewolf had been sent home when their constant bickering resulted in a completely inedible blood pudding that even the judges' supernatural palates couldn't handle. That left us, Marina, and her new partner, a nervous hedge witch she'd manipulated into alliance after her original partner mysteriously withdrew from the competition, the Jin twins who had somehow convinced the producers to let them work together, and a pair of kitchen brownies whose technical skills were absolutely flawless, but whose presentations lacked creativity. Semi-final challenge, Celeste announced as we gathered in the studio kitchen, is going to test every skill you've developed over the past month. We want you to create a temperature-themed showpiece. Something that showcases both hot and cold elements, requires precise technical execution, and tells a story about your partnership. My heart rate picked up. A showpiece meant hours of work, complex construction, and the kind of precision that had become our specialty. But here's the twist, Celeste continued with the kind of smile that meant trouble was coming. The fire-aligned partner must stay at least 3 feet away from the finished product at all times, and the non-fire partner must judge all temperatures without any assistance from thermometers or temperature probes. I felt Asher tense beside me. This wasn't just a challenge, it was a direct attack on our collaborative method. Someone had been studying our techniques and designed a challenge specifically to neutralize our advantages. You have 6 hours, Celeste announced. And remember, this is semifinals. One team will be going home tonight. As we walked to our station, I could feel the weight of every camera, every competitor's gaze, every producer hoping for drama. "They're trying to break us up," Asher said quietly, his jaw set in grim lines. I know. I was already mentally cataloging what we could make with the 3-foot restriction. Macaron Tower, 7 tiers, alternating hot and cold flavors. You can project controlled heat from 3 feet away, we've proven that. I can judge macaron doneness by visual timing and the way they form feet. For the cold elements, we use liquid nitrogen effects that I can coordinate while you maintain safe distance. Asher studied my rough sketch, his expression shifting from worry to calculation. The structural engineering alone is going to be a nightmare, I finished. But if we pull it off, it'll be the most technically impressive thing anyone's attempted this season. And if we don't, then we go home together, I said simply. But I'd rather fail attempting something extraordinary than succeed at something safe. He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression. Not just partnership, not just professional respect, but something deeper. Something that made my chest tighten in ways that had nothing to do with curse-dampened sensations. "Let's build something impossible," he said finally. The next 6 hours were the most intense of my culinary career. Macarons are notoriously finicky under the best circumstances. They require precise measurements, exact temperatures, perfect timing, and environmental conditions that border on laboratory-level control. Attempting to make 7 different flavors simultaneously with construction requirements that defied normal physics, while maintaining a 3-foot separation from my partner, was either inspired or insane. Probably both. First tier, I called out, working at breakneck speed to prepare 7 different macaron batters.
Classic vanilla lavender, neutral base, room temperature construction. Asher positioned himself exactly 3 feet away, hands extended towards the oven. Ready for controlled heat. Perfect. Hold steady for 8 minutes. While the first batch baked, I was already preparing the second tier, spiced hot chocolate macarons that would require different temperature treatment entirely. Second batch ready, I called. Temperature steady on first batch, ready for transition on second, Asher replied, and I marveled at how seamlessly we'd learned to coordinate complex, simultaneous processes. The third and fourth batches went in rotation. Frozen strawberry, which required liquid nitrogen treatment after baking, and cinnamon fire, which required higher heat and careful monitoring to prevent the spice oils from burning. By the time we reached the 5th batch, we were operating in a zone I'd never experienced before. Pure focus, perfect synchronization, every movement precise and purposeful. Saffron, he said quietly during a brief lull while batches 4 and 5 baked simultaneously, I need to tell you something. Kinda busy here, I said, whipping ganache for the hot chocolate filling while monitoring macaron feet formation on 2 different batches. If we don't make it through this challenge, we will. But if we don't, he insisted, I want you to know that these past few weeks working with you have been the best of my life. I looked up from my ganache, startled by the raw honesty in his voice. Asher, I've spent 16 years believing I was meant to be alone, he continued, his eyes fixed on his hands as he maintained precise heat control. That my fire was a curse that would always separate me from other people. But with you, he trailed off, then shook his head. Just thank you for showing me what partnership could feel like. My chest tightened with emotion I didn't have time to process. We're not done yet, I said firmly. We're going to win this thing, and then we're going to win the whole competition, and then we're both going to get our wishes granted. What are you going to wish for? He asked quietly. The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on winning, on proving that my curse couldn't defeat me, that I hadn't really thought about what came after. To feel warmth again, I said automatically. To get my life back. And then what? Then I stopped, realizing I had no idea what came after then. Where would I go? What would I do? Would I return to my little patisserie in London, back to the life I had before? Would I ever see Asher again? The thought hit me like a physical blow. After the competition ended, after our wishes were granted, we'd have no reason to stay in contact. He'd return to whatever life fire demons lived, and I'd go back to being a normal witch with a normal bakery. We'd probably never see each other again. Saffron? Asher's voice was concerned. Everything okay? Fine, I said quickly, refocusing on my work. Just let's get through this challenge first. But something had shifted in the atmosphere between us. Some recognition of the temporary nature of our partnership that made every shared glance, every coordinated movement feel bittersweet. The final 2 tiers were the most challenging. A liquid nitrogen ice cream macaron that required split-second timing to prevent the shells from shattering, and a flambe finished macaron that needed Asher's fire at its most controlled. Last batch, I announced, sliding the final tray toward the oven. This has to be perfect. It will be, Asher said with quiet confidence. As the final macarons baked, I began the delicate process of tower assembly. 7 tiers, each requiring precise structural support, alternating hot and cold elements that couldn't be allowed to affect each other's temperature stability. 30 minutes left, called Celeste. We've got this, I muttered, more to myself than to Asher, as I carefully positioned the 5th tier and began the liquid nitrogen treatment for the frozen elements. That's when disaster struck. I was applying liquid nitrogen to the strawberry macarons when I noticed something wrong with the consistency. The mixture was freezing too quickly, creating ice crystals that would ruin the texture. "Something's wrong with the nitrogen," I called to Asher. "The mixture is..." The canister slipped from my hands, liquid nitrogen spilling across our work surface and sending clouds of freezing vapor billowing through our station. In a normal kitchen, this would have been a serious safety hazard. Liquid nitrogen at minus 196 degrees Celsius could cause instant frostbite, and the vapor could displace oxygen in the air. But we weren't in a normal kitchen, and Asher wasn't a normal partner. "Everyone back!" I heard Celeste shout, but her voice seemed to come from very far away. Asher didn't back away. Instead, he stepped forward, extending his hands toward the expanding cloud of supercooled vapor. "What are you doing?" I shouted over the sound of boiling nitrogen. "Creating equilibrium," he said through gritted teeth. I watched in amazement as he began to project heat directly into the nitrogen cloud, not to dispel it, but to control it. The freezing vapor swirled around his hands, contained and directed by his supernatural fire. "The tower," I said suddenly, understanding his plan. "You're using the nitrogen cloud to flash freeze the structural elements while using your heat to prevent thermal shock." "Exactly," he said, sweat beading on his forehead from the effort. "But I need you to position the final tiers now while I have the temperature differential controlled." The next 5 minutes were the most technically demanding of my career. Working within a cloud of controlled liquid nitrogen, guided by Asher's precisely directed heat, I assembled the final 3 tiers of our macaron tower. When the vapor finally cleared, we stood back to look at what we'd created. 7 tiers of perfect macarons, alternating between elements so hot that they steamed gently in the air and others so cold that they had frost crystals forming on their surfaces. The structural engineering was flawless, the temperature contrasts dramatic and visually stunning. It was, without a question, the most technically impressive thing either of us had ever created. "Time!" Celeste called. We stepped back from our station, both breathing hard, both staring at our impossible creation. "How did we just do that?" I asked quietly. "I have absolutely no idea," Asher admitted, "but it worked." When the judges tasted our macaron tower, perfect shells, flawless flavors, technical execution that bordered on the supernatural, they were speechless. "In 30 years of judging culinary competitions," the head judge said finally, "I have never seen temperature control like this. The precision required to maintain 7 different thermal environments simultaneously, it shouldn't be possible." But it is possible when you have partners who truly understand each other's strengths and limitations. They awarded us a perfect 10. As the cameras stopped rolling and other contestants came to examine our creation, I felt a strange mix of triumph and sadness. We'd won the semifinal. We were going to the finale. But we were also one step closer to the end of this partnership. One step closer to going back to our separate lives. "Saffron, about what I said earlier," Asher said quietly as we cleaned our station. "Don't," I said quickly. "Not yet. Let's get through the finale first." He nodded, understanding without needing explanation. But as we walked back to the house that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking towards something that would change everything. Not only the competition, but whatever this thing was growing between us. And I still had no idea what I was going to wish for. We're in the final stretch. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to see how this ends. Finale day arrived with all the pomp and supernatural circumstance the producers could muster. The studio had been transformed into something that looked like a cross between a high-end restaurant kitchen and the magical ritual space. Floating cameras circled overhead like mechanical familiars. A judging table had been expanded to include not just our usual panel, but several prominent figures from the supernatural culinary world. And at the center of it all, looking every inch the powerful archmage he was, sat Malachi Thornwick, the warlock who had cursed me. I felt Asher tense beside me when we entered the finale kitchen, and I realized he'd recognize Malachi from my stories. "Is that?" he asked quietly. "Yeah," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil in my chest. "That's him." We're down to the final stretch. Marina had managed to manipulate her way through the semifinal despite a technically inferior showpiece, largely by playing up her partner's underdog story to the judges. The kitchen brownies had advanced with their usual flawless technique, though their presentation remained uninspired. And then there were us, the fire demon and the cursed witch who had somehow turned their individual disasters into collective strength. "Final challenge," Celeste announced, her glamour shimmering with excitement. "Today, you're not just cooking for our judges. You're cooking for the supernatural community's most discerning palates, including our guest of honor, Archmage Malachi Thornwick." Malachi inclined his head slightly, his purple eyes scanning the three remaining teams with cool assessment. When his gaze landed on me, I saw a flicker of recognition, followed by something that might have been amusement. "Your challenge," Celeste continued, "is to create a wedding cake. But not just any wedding cake. A wedding cake for the Archmage's upcoming nuptials to his longtime partner, Master Botanist Elena Greenval." My blood ran cold. Not only was I being asked to create a wedding cake for the man who had cursed me, but if I failed, I'd lose my chance at the wish that could break that curse. "The cake must serve 200 guests," Celeste went on, "must incorporate both sweet and savory elements to reflect the union of different magical traditions, and must be finished with a flame presentation that will be performed tableside during the ceremony." The flame presentation requirement was clearly designed for us, a final test of whether our partnership could handle the most challenging possible scenario. But here's the twist. And of course there was a twist. The flame must be created by supernatural fire, but it cannot damage or even warm the cake itself. You must create what magical chefs call cold fire, flame that provides visual spectacle without thermal effect. I heard Marina curse softly from her station. The kitchen brownies looked confused. But I felt something click into place in my mind, a puzzle piece I'd been missing finally settling into position. "Cold fire," I said quietly to Asher. "What we created accidentally during the nitrogen incident. You projected heat while I channeled it away from the product. You think we can do it intentionally?" he asked. I think I said, looking directly at Malachi, that we were meant to do it. Something in my voice must have conveyed my realization, because Asher's eyes widened slightly. "You think this is all connected? Your curse, this challenge, everything?" "I think," I said carefully, "that some curses are meant to be broken in very specific ways. And I think our Archmage Judge knew exactly what he was doing 6 months ago." The challenge began, and for the first time since the competition started, I felt completely calm. This wasn't just about winning anymore. This was about understanding the deeper magic at work, the way individual curses and blessings could weave together into something larger and more meaningful. 3-tier construction, I announced, falling into our familiar rhythm. Savory base layer with herb-infused sponge and mushroom mousse. Sweet middle layer with lavender honey cake and elderflower cream. Top tier traditional vanilla bean with rose buttercream. "Thermal management?" Asher asked, already positioning himself for optimal heat projection. "Complex," I admitted. 3 different temperature requirements, plus we need to keep everything stable for the cold fire finale. But we've done complex before. Never this complex. Then we'll just have to be better than we've ever been. The next 4 hours were a masterclass in everything we'd learned about working together. Every technique we'd developed, every instinct we'd honed, every moment of trust we'd built, All of it came together in the creation of something extraordinary. But more than that, something magical was happening between us as we worked. Every time I needed heat at a specific temperature, Asher provided it before I could ask. Every time he needed guidance on timing or doneness, I called out adjustments before he could request them. We were operating as a single entity, two halves of a whole that had somehow learned to function in perfect synchronization. "Final assembly," I announced, as we entered the last hour. This is where it gets tricky. The cake was beautiful. 3 tiers of architectural perfection, decorated with sugarwork that looked like crystallized starlight, flavors that balanced sweet and savory in harmonious complexity. But the real test was yet to come. "Cold fire," Asher said, looking at his hands with something between determination and apprehension. "How do we create flame that doesn't burn?" "The same way we've been doing everything else. Together." I had an idea, something born from all our midnight conversations and accidental discoveries. What if my curse and his fire weren't just compatible? What if they were designed to work together? "Give me your hands." "Saffron, if this doesn't work..." "It'll work," I said with confidence I didn't entirely feel. "Trust me." He removed his gloves and extended his hands toward the completed cake. I placed my palms over his, skin to skin, the way we'd done that first night in the practice kitchen. "Create fire," I said quietly. "All the fire you can manage. Don't hold back, don't try to control it. Just let it burn." "You'll be hurt." "I'll be fine, just trust me." Asher took a deep breath and released his supernatural fire at full strength for the first time since I'd known him. Flames roared from his hands, hot enough to melt steel, bright enough to make everyone in the studio step back in alarm. But the moment the fire touched my hands, something extraordinary happened. The flames didn't burn me, they flowed through me, transformed by whatever magic my curse contained. The fire maintained its visual intensity, its dramatic presence, but lost all its thermal properties. It became exactly what the challenge required: cold fire.
Blue-white flames danced around the wedding cake, creating a spectacular display that looked like captured starlight. The cake remained completely unaffected, not even warming from the supernatural fire that surrounded it. "Impossible," I heard one of the judges breathe. "Beautiful," said another. When I looked up at the judging table, Malachi was smiling. "Time," Celeste called, but her voice seemed to come from a great distance. We stepped back from our creation, both breathing hard, both staring at what we'd accomplished. The cake was perfect. The cold fire display was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. But more than that, something fundamental had shifted between us in that moment of complete magical synchronization. "Saffron," Asher said quietly, his voice rough with emotion, "I think I understand now." "Understand what?" "Why this happened. Your curse, my fire, us meeting here. I don't think any of it was accident." Before I could respond, the judges began their deliberation. The kitchen brownies had created a technically flawless but uninspired traditional cake. Marina's team had produced something beautiful but structurally unsound. Their flame presentation had actually damaged their decorations. And our cake was magic made manifest. The winners of Cauldron Bake-Off are Saffron Grains and Asher Voss. The studio erupted in applause, but I barely heard it. All I could focus on was Asher's face, the wonder and joy, and something deeper that I was finally ready to name. "We did it," he said, pulling me into a hug that I could almost feel the warmth of. "We did it," I agreed, but my eyes were on Malachi, who was approaching our station with a satisfied expression. "Congratulations! Truly exceptional work. I believe you've both earned your wishes." "About that,"
I said, stepping forward. I think I understand what you did now. The curse, the challenge, bringing us together, it wasn't random, was it? Malachi's smile was enigmatic. He said, "Sometimes the greatest magic comes from helping people discover what they truly need, rather than what they think they want." He gestured, and I felt the familiar tingle of powerful magic being worked. "Your curse is lifted, Miss Graves. You should now be able to feel temperature normally." The change was immediate and overwhelming. Suddenly, I could feel the warmth radiating from Asher's skin, the cool air of the studio, the residual heat from our equipment. After 6 months of numbness, the sensation was almost too intense to process. "And you, Mr. Voss," continued Malachi, turning to Asher, "your fire should now respond to your conscious control rather than your emotional state. You should be able to touch others without fear of burning them." Asher stared at his hands, and I could see the moment when he realized that the heat shimmer was gone, that his supernatural fire was finally, truly under his command. "But I don't understand," I said. "We each get one wish. What about what you'll do now? Where you'll go? What comes next?" I looked at Asher, who was looking back at me with the same realization dawning in his eyes. "I know what I want to wish for," I said suddenly. "So do I," Asher said simultaneously. We spoke at the same time. "I wish for us to stay together." Malachi's laughter was warm and genuine. "I believe," he said, "that wish has already been granted." 6 months later, I stood in front of a food truck that defied every expectation of what a food truck should be. Frost and Flame, artisanal pastries baked at room temperature, read the sign painted an elegant script above serving windows that never fogged because Asher could control the internal climate with supernatural precision. It had been his idea, actually. The day after we won Cauldron Bake-Off, as we sat in the hotel restaurant planning what came next, he'd sketched it on a napkin. "Food truck?" I'd said, looking at his rough drawing. "Think about it," he'd said, his eyes bright with possibility. "We could travel, bring our techniques to people everywhere. Farmers markets, festivals, catering events. No overhead, no permanent location tying us down, just us and the road, and whatever challenges we want to take on." And the theme? Temperature mastery, he'd said simply. Hot and cold desserts that shouldn't be able to exist in the same space, but do, because we make them work together. The truck had been custom built to accommodate both supernatural fire and precision temperature control. Heat-resistant surfaces, specialized ventilation, freezer units that could maintain precise temperatures despite Asher's presence, and workspace designed for 2 people who had learned to move around each other like dancers. Our signature item was something we called impossible ice cream, desserts that were simultaneously hot and cold, like molten chocolate cake with ice cream that never melted, or flambéed fruit over frozen yogurt that stayed perfectly chilled despite being covered in actual flames. But my personal favorite was simpler. Hot chocolate that was literally hot to the touch, steam rising from the surface, rich and warming, and everything comfort food should be. After 6 months of not being able to feel warmth, every sip was still a small miracle. "Order up," Asher called from inside the truck, sliding a tray of our latest creation, fire-toasted marshmallows over liquid nitrogen ice cream, through the service window. I handed the dessert to our customer, a wide-eyed teenager who'd been following our Instagram account and driven 2 hours just to try our impossible confections. "This is so cool," she breathed, watching steam and frost swirl together over her dessert. "How do you even do this?" "Magic," I said with a wink, and for once, it wasn't just a figure of speech. As the afternoon crowd thinned out, I climbed into the truck to help Asher clean up. The space was cramped but efficient, designed for 2 people who had learned to work in perfect synchronization. "Good day?" he asked, not looking up from the dishes he was washing. "Great day," I confirmed. settling into the passenger seat that had become my mobile office space. 3 catering inquiries, 2 food blogger requests, and that reporter from the Supernatural Culinary Review wants to do a feature on us. The same magazine that published Malachi's review of your old place? Asher asked with a raised eyebrow. The very same. Apparently, redemption stories sell magazines. We worked in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of easy companionship we'd developed over months of living and working in close quarters. The truck was our home, as much as our business. We'd converted the back area into a tiny but functional living space, complete with a bed that had fire-resistant sheets and a small kitchen where I could finally cook for pleasure instead of just profit. "Asher," I said as we finished closing up for the day, "do you ever miss it? The competition, the cameras, the drama?" He considered the question seriously, the way he approached everything. "I miss the adrenaline sometimes, the pressure of performing under impossible circumstances. But this," he gestured around the truck, "at the life we'd built together, this is better. Even though we're not famous, not on TV anymore?" "Especially because of that," he said firmly. "Fame was never the point, Saffron. The point was finding out what we could accomplish together." I smiled, settling back against him in the driver's seat we'd learned to share during our long drives between cities. His arm came around me automatically, and I marveled again at the simple miracle of being able to feel his warmth. "So, what's next?" I asked, pulling out my phone to show him our booking calendar. "We've got the Renaissance Fair next weekend, that wedding in Portland the week after, and then we're free until the Denver Food Festival, which means we have a whole week with no schedule, no obligations, and an open road." "Dangerous thinking," I warned him. "The last time you said that, we ended up catering a werewolf pack bonding ceremony in the middle of Montana. And it was amazing," he pointed out. "Plus, we learned that werewolves have surprisingly sophisticated palates." I laughed, remembering the challenge of creating desserts for supernatural beings with enhanced senses and very specific dietary requirements. "Okay, point taken. So, what are you thinking for our week off?" He was quiet for a moment, and when I looked up at him, there was something different in his expression. Nervous, maybe. Excited. "Actually," he said, reaching into his pocket, "I was thinking we might want to make a stop in Las Vegas." "Vegas? For what?" Instead of answering, he pulled out a small velvet box.
My breath caught in my throat. "Saffron Graves," he said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty in his eyes. "We've proven we can work together under impossible circumstances, survive supernatural cooking competitions, and run a business that defies the laws of physics. I'm pretty sure we can handle marriage." He opened the box, revealing a ring that was unlike anything I'd ever seen. The band was crafted from some kind of metal that seemed to shift between warm gold and cool silver. And the stone looked like captured fire and ice, somehow containing both flame and frost in perfect balance. "It's a fire opal set in temperature shift metal," he explained quickly, the words tumbling out like he'd rehearsed the speech. "The opal changes colors based on ambient temperature, and the metal adjusts to match your body heat so it's always comfortable. I had it custom made by a jeweler in the Supernatural District, and I know it's probably presumptuous to assume you'd want to marry someone whose idea of a romantic dinner is something that's simultaneously on fire and frozen solid, but..." I silenced him with a kiss that I could finally feel the warmth of, pouring 6 months of partnership and trust, and something deeper than either of us had expected to find into that single gesture. "Yes," I said against his lips. "Obviously, yes." His smile was brighter than his supernatural fire had ever been. "Really?" he asked. "Because I have to warn you, marrying a fire demon comes with certain challenges. Property insurance is a nightmare, and you'll never have to worry about cold coffee again. But, Asher," I interrupted, laughing, "I can't feel temperature anymore, remember? Oh wait, actually, I can now, thanks to a very wise archmage who knew exactly what he was doing when he cursed me 6 months ago." You think Malachi planned all of this? The curse, the reality television, us meeting? I looked down at the ring on my finger, watching the opal shift from deep blue to warm amber as it adjusted to my skin temperature. I think, I said slowly, that some people are meant to find each other, and sometimes the universe needs to give them a little push in the right direction, even if that push involves hexes and reality television. Especially if it involves hexes and reality television. We drove toward Vegas that night, our truck loaded with impossible desserts and improbable dreams. Two formerly broken people who had learned to fit together perfectly. As we crossed state lines under a sky full of stars, my phone buzzed with a notification, an email to our business account, with a subject line that made my blood run cold. Catering inquiry, Hell's Kitchen, literally. I opened the message and read aloud. Dear Frost and Flame, we've heard about your unique temperature manipulation techniques and would like to discuss a catering opportunity. The venue is unconventional, 7 circles below sea level, the guest list is challenging,
various demons, fallen angels, and reformed dark spirits. And the theme is redemption through dessert. We understand you specialize in impossible combinations. This job might be right up your alley. Please bring marshmallows. Sincerely, Lucifer Morningstar, Executive Chef, Hell's Kitchen Rehabilitation Program. Asher and I looked at each other. Vegas first, he said finally. Marriage second. Hell third. Sounds like a plan, I agreed, settling back into my seat with a grin. Though our honeymoon destinations keep getting more interesting. Just wait until you see what I have planned for our first anniversary. As the miles rolled by beneath our wheels, I couldn't help but smile at the beautiful impossibility of our life. A cursed witch and a touch-starved fire demon, creating magic through pastry, finding love in the most unlikely circumstances. Some stories end with happily ever after. Ours was just beginning. And that's the story of how a cursed witch and a touch-starved fire demon found love in the chaos of a supernatural cooking competition. If you enjoyed this hour-long journey into magical romance and culinary chaos, please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps the algorithm know that people want to hear more stories like this one. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a tale of supernatural romance, magical adventures, and the kind of love that can literally defy the laws of physics. Share this video with anyone who loves slow burn romance, enemies to lovers dynamics, or just really good food descriptions that make you hungry for impossible desserts. And here's what I really want to know. Drop a comment below telling me which part of Saffron and Asher's story resonated most with you. Was it that first moment when they touched hands in the midnight kitchen? The dramatic sabotage scene with the liquid nitrogen? The way they learned to create cold fire together? Or maybe that final proposal scene in the food truck? I love hearing which moments hit you right in the feelings, so don't be shy. Tell me your favorite scene, your favorite line, or just what you'd order from Frost and Flame if their truck rolled up to your neighborhood. Thanks for spending over an hour with me diving into this magical love story. Until next time, keep believing in impossible things, and maybe keep some marshmallows handy, just in case.